Welcome to the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. This podcast is about all things outdoor photography, including landscapes, wildlife, macro, and more. The show features two talented photographers, Henry Doyle and Ryan Taylor, who bring their different experiences in photography to the podcast. The show is released weekly every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. In today's episode, Henry and Ryan get to talk with John Walrath, an imaging, training, and technical support manager from DataColor. They go over all things related to color management and how to get started with the process, including what monitor calibrators to buy, the fine-tuning to get desired results, and how post-processing and printing your photos will look better because of it.
Welcome back to episode 65 of the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. And today we're having a manager from DataColor here today.
Yes, we have John Walrath on the show. Welcome, John. Go ahead and tell us a bit about more of your photography background and your involvement in the industry.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, guys. My name's John Walrath. I'm the imaging, training, and technical support manager for DataColor. My primary role at DataColor is to help people understand color management, troubleshoot problems, and help use the products that we make. I guess I work on the support team. That's basically the role at DataColor that I have. Photographically, I guess probably the easiest place to begin is, I guess, right from the beginning. My father was an avid photographer, and I really kind of was exposed to no pun intended, exposed to photography really through my dad. Growing up, he would, we'd always be taking photographs of, my brother and I just to kind of document time. And, he'd been into photography for a long time before we were born. But we had a black and white darkroom in our basement growing up, and, got to spend a lot of time down there and just kind of watch I was very enamored with the working in the darkroom, at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't take it up as a hobby or even profession until my 20s, but it was photography has really been part of my life forever. In college, I took a black and white darkroom class, and that kind of rekindled that relationship with photography, and but it really took off when I first got my digital camera, just getting out of school and, weighing the cost of each frame of film, and not having to do that with digital really kind of it really just kind of accelerated the learning and the passion and drive to become, really the best photographer that I could be. I really enjoy, if I were to say there's a genre of photography, I really love, a lot of I love black and white landscape photography. So Ansel Adams would be kind of one of the guys that I've always admired. Just the capturing the grand landscape. I really do enjoy that.
Awesome.
I like photographing things. My background's in interior architecture in school. So I did a lot of interior and architectural photography professionally. And that's kind of where I ran into, kind of became familiar with DataColor. But, if I were to say the things I would photograph most these days are really my kids. And it's kind of, I always kind of look at it. It's kind of been cool how it's kind of come full circle. My dad really kind of impressed upon me the importance of, capturing moments in time. And so I kind of have that relationship with my kids now. It's just kind of having a camera with me when we go out and do something as simple as a walk to, just kind of, it's exposing them to photography but it is really, it's important to just, capture, time as it goes by. And, that's kind of basically, where I am photographically today.
It's awesome. Yeah, I know with film, it's just the excitement of just seeing the papers and developers just come to life, underneath all that light too. I remember doing that in high school.
Yeah. You can, you go out and photograph, and it's like you kind of know when you've got a keeper. you see it on the back of, digital today, you get a preview of that on your screen, and like you kind of know when you nail the shot. With film, I mean, you with the experience, if you got the exposure right and the composition and those kinds of things, but you can't, there's an element of surprise. When the film was developed, you never quite know. There's always a little bit of a question. So I think, with film, the highs are higher and the lows are lower.
Yeah, that's
than
accurate.
digital. It's more of a roller coaster ride. But,
so
there's something magical about developing film and
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so where are you at today with like film and digital? Are you mostly film shooting or mostly digital, or?
Oh no, digital primarily. I still have my parents have long moved from that original house that we grew up in, but Dad always asked, if I want the film, the stuff for the darkroom. So he hung on to it. So I guess if I build a darkroom, I know where to get the supplies. But I'm also very interested in, I've tried doing palladium printing at home before. I really need a darkroom for that, but a traditional black and white chemical wet darkroom is. I'd love to have that at one point in my life here, but I'm very interested in. Printing is a big part of my life, and I'm very interested in. I like the editing process of what you go through to make a print, from an inkjet printer. But I also like the processes of what can you do outside of just getting an image off on the printer? Can you how can you manipulate the image afterwards? So I'm a very hands-on. My background's in interior architecture, but I also have a very part of that degree was a very classic art degree. I took a lot of painting and drawing type classes. So keeping my hands dirty is always something I enjoy, the very hands-on process of creating art.
Yeah, and probably with that film background too, like even if you're not shooting film, you appreciate the art of printing more maybe than some of the, all digital photographers that have grown up with just that. So
yeah, I mean, I can't say I'm a master in the darkroom, but I do have, some experience, and I do have some of that in my photographic history, and I feel very fortunate to have that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like where you ended up working too, because that kind of, color calibration, everything that kind of goes hand in hand. So do you want to kind of go into how you started working with DataColor specifically?
I became familiar with DataColor. Oh, let's see here. I started working. I had owned a business before I started working for DataColor. Sold that business in 2010. Before I sold the business, I had started doing some interior and architectural photography, and I was having color problems. My task was I was working with your designers, architects, ad agencies. There's been people who are relying on me to capture interior spaces accurately. Designers have gone to great extent to make. To choose a wall color, to choose fabric colors, to choose finishes in a space, to really kind of show off what they can do and create an environment where for the people that are in that environment, a certain mood. And so my job as a photographer is to be able to capture images that capture that the color, the feel of an interior. So it wasn't just. And these people that were hiring me were using these as marketing material. So this was material that was going to be used, in magazines, online. So it really had to kind of capture the essence of who they are. Like if it was a home builder, you had to project a certain, first of all, realism of the space, but also persuade a potential client to use them as a builder for their home. So, there was a lot of accuracy demands in that, in those jobs that I would take. And I had color problems. I wasn't able to do that as successfully as I wanted to. And so I started down the path of figuring out how to, capture interiors accurately. And you learn about monitor calibration, which is really where, color management begins for any photographer. That's really the first place to begin. Mm. I've reached out to DataColor as a customer before I worked for DataColor to find out what I needed to do, and it helped me get set on the path, and so it really helped me in my professional work, and it really just kind of permeated down from there. In 2013 is when I started working for DataColor. So I've always worked on the support team for DataColor, and so now it's kind of, that's come full circle in my life here a little bit too. Is, I've worked DataColor on as a customer, and also for now helping customers understand and know our products better. It's kind of a cool thing to be able to do that.
Yeah, I can only imagine with doing like an interior shoot like that, you really have to get the colors very accurate. Probably a bit of creativity to it, but it's more probably rigid compared to like more artistic forms of photography, I imagine.
Yeah, and it worked really well for me because I'm someone who does like the details and is a little meticulous with things, and I don't mind reading any, I would rather read an instruction manual than a novel. I like that kind of thing, and it was really interesting to learn and put into application. But it really kind of suited, my fondness for photographing architecture, and just be able to do it better, through color management. And it really wasn't implementing too many things, but it was just slowing down a little bit and just doing things the right way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I really like that saying you said about, the instruction manual versus the novel. That's a great way to describe it there. So maybe go ahead and talk a little bit more about calibration itself and maybe why it's important for photography.
So I think calibration is part of what's called color management. Color management is really about digital communication. There are industry standards for communicating with color. If you've heard of ICC profiles before, ICC stands for International Color Consortium. Back when, I guess it was the mid-90s, when digital communication became, companies realized there was going to be a future in digital communication, and we needed a way to, more of a unified way to talk and communicate with color, where ICC standards have come in. You can go to icc.org and or color.org, excuse me, and look up more information on ICC and its foundings and such. But basically, ICC is there are standards for digital color communication. That's basically color management in a nutshell. Is being able to communicate with color, or digitally with color.
So is that like sRGB and Adobe RGB, or is that something else?
Those are important terms to know about, color management. Those relate to color spaces.
Okay.
So if you've heard of sRGB, Adobe RGB, those are color spaces that are universal standards for the output so for a monitor. If you've ever heard the term of, you've got a wide gamut monitor or an Adobe RGB monitor, what that basically means, it can render color near or all of the Adobe RGB color range.
Okay.
sRGB fits in to Adobe RGB, so it's just sRGB is more of a common denominator for color, or a color space. where are we going with that? So yeah, color management is about communicating with color. For photographers, we're really concerned about able to capturing the world around us accurately or as we intend it to be. We're concerned with the fidelity of the information on our computer and how it's rendered on our screen. So we need to make sure we have an accurate view into our digital world. That's where display calibration comes in. And then output, we're thinking about where our images are going to be seen next, how we're sharing it, whether it's in a print, whether it's digitally. Those are concerns of color management as well. So there's really 3 points in the process where a photographer needs to worry about color management, and that's at capture, at edit, and then at output.
Okay.
It's interesting because a lot of people, they shoot for different reasons. Like they mainly use it to export like digital JPEGs, or some people print their work too. So yeah, it's neat to how it's all integral in such a way with color management too.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned the place to begin for anybody in color management is display calibration. Display calibration is going to ensure that you're seeing your images as they truly are. Your computer's job is to use a profile on your monitor to render the image. And what a display calibrator will do is it'll evaluate your monitor, create a custom profile for your monitor that's based on the measurements that it takes during that calibration process.
So are all ICC profiles custom made like that, or is there some that are like almost like preset?
Yeah. So, when you install drivers for a monitor, when you install drivers for a printer, and even in presets in like Lightroom and Photoshop, you can go to you can set standard Adobe. I'm blanking on the different terms, but those are pre-baked ICC profiles. Your monitor it'll use a generic profile until you create a custom profile. Paper profiles. So if you have an Epson or a Canon printer, part of the driver installation will be installing generic profiles for the papers. And those are meant to be used for every printer at model for a particular paper. And you can create a custom ICC profile for a paper and a printer combination too. But so you want to be using a custom profile for your monitor.
Okay.
It can be helpful to use a custom profile, and that's something you can make yourself, but you can still get very good results with a generic or general profile from a paper manufacturer.
Right. Yeah, especially when everyone's, computer systems and displays are so unique and different, so that does raise a good point of like having it be unique and tailor-made to your setup there too.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point is, it's not just for you. Color management, my mentor at DataColor, he always said, just don't think of your monitor as the standard for everybody else's monitor. There's industry standards that are, made for this reason. So you correct your monitor to the industry standard. It allows you to work effectively yourself, but if you're going to work, in a collaboration, like you guys, I'm sure, if you share images, with each other, calibrating your monitors will allow you to, effectively work together. So
yeah, and like if you're working on one edit between two people too, like you can send it over and you actually know you're talking about the same exposure, the same white balance.
Yeah, exactly. It's maybe a little more common in the video world to work collaboratively, but there are certainly a lot of instances where you would in a photo workflow.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe we could touch upon a little bit about like calibrators themselves. Is there any specific like models or types that you maybe like could give to beginners and like recommend at least?
Yeah. Well, so Spider X is DataColor's current display calibration tool. It's the current generation, and it's a pretty advanced tool. It's not it. I say that it's an advanced tool, but it's also not a hard tool to use. So there's a lot of, let's say, theory and mathematical things that you can get into with color management, but for a photographer, I'm primarily helping and addressing the practical side of things, the application of these practices and tools. So for a display calibration tool, the Spider X is it comes in two different flavors, if you will, a Spider X Pro and a Spider X Elite. Don't be the Pro designation of the Spider X Pro isn't necessarily that it's meant for the pro photographer. It's a tool that really anybody can easily use.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's more features and things that the Elite offers that they're both equally easy to use tools. And the good thing about it is it's really it's all a very, very automatic process. The Spider X Pro and the Elite will calibrate your display in under 2 minutes.
Wow.
So it's a very quick process. It's a process that we recommend doing once a month. So it really isn't, it doesn't take up much time at all. It's something you can, just do very quickly if you're before you make a print or before you sit down to do an edit. It's a very, the barrier to doing it is pretty low.
And do you get a lot of like beginning photographers purchasing this product, or?
Yeah. Generally, the display calibration tool is, I think if we're going to be realistic here, it's not as sexy as a new lens or a new camera.
Yeah.
And there's certainly tools that you need to have in place, along with your computer equipment. I think it's definitely an important part of the editing process. You really do need to make sure you're accurately seeing your image file. So that's really part of what that's part of what a display calibrator will do, is it'll make sure that you're seeing your image as it actually is.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I was going to ask you about the frequency of calibrating. You said a month. Is there like any certain reason why? Is it just because of maybe like the lighting, the ambient light in your room, or maybe something like that, or what's the reason for that?
Yeah, well, it's back when, it could be. There's maybe a couple of reasons. I would say that, one, it's just kind of, you get into a habit of making sure your monitor is accurate. Over a month time, newer LED technology really doesn't drift much at all. CRTs would a lot, but if, of course, that's not a common current technology. We have always just recommended a month, and it's good to, there's a certain, it's a maintenance thing in a lot of ways too. Just making sure you've got a current profile for your monitor, and that one of the things that the display calibrator will do is it'll make sure your brightness is set properly. Brightness is not often talked about, or I think it should be talked about more.
Yeah.
In calibration, because that really affects how how you're adjusting your image. And it also affects, what your print output will be. If your monitor is showing you a artificially brightens view of your image, you're not going to get a print that comes out that's consistent with your display.
Yeah, I definitely found that. So like when I was beginning photography, I remember one shoot I did out in the snow. And I liked it on the computer. You know, the snow was nice and white, but when I printed that, it was just that muddy gray color. And that was just simply because of an inaccurate display. So,
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And you could even almost go like a step back in the process and go back to just taking the image itself and making sure your histogram and everything looks right. And also your LCD screen's the proper brightness too, with your surroundings.
Yeah. I mean, we use a raw, raw files have a lot of latitude in them. But, going back to the point of capture, you can use color management, a color chip chart like a spider checker, to as a reference for white balance. That's something you need on location and change, to something you can't kind of mimic in post-production. And that's, like a gray card basically is what I'm talking about here. But you also have the color chart, and that will allow you to correct color automatically in the spider checker software. And and then thinking downstream, print problems really aren't the printer's problems. A lot of it comes down to display calibration and file, how good the file is that you're editing and through.
Right. Yeah. Is there any like monitors or displays like that you've used or maybe you could recommend too?
Well, I would certainly say to someone, if you're in the market for a monitor and you're a photographer and you're going to be printing, you really want to think about an Adobe Rgb monitor, so a wide gamut monitor. The Mac P3 monitors are also very good. Like an iMac would have. They're very good. I think you can edit on Mac laptops or really any laptop, but having an external screen with a lot of real estate really is going to help make it a better experience. So, I mean, I would say generally, a lot of the I can't say that I've seen a bad monitor on the market, but I also would recommend if you can swing it, it's a little more expensive monitor, but Adobe Rgb monitor would suit a photographer pretty well.
And then in camera too, would you suggest like shooting in Adobe Rgb? It's like that seamless workflow.
Well, if you're shooting in, so I know you're referring back to if you have sRGB or Adobe Rgb in your camera settings that relate to non-raw capture. So a raw file, the color space is assigned in the raw converter. When you're shooting a JPEG or something, that's when you need to make sure you've got that set properly in your camera, and that's when you would set it to Adobe Rgb.
Got it. Okay.
Because the color space decision is made at capture for non-raw capture. For raw, that's assigned in the raw profile or raw editor.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
And it typically asks you, I believe, during like image export, because I know that's like a setting I can choose.
Yeah. So if you're exporting in Lightroom or Photoshop, the export, or if you're using the legacy export for web in Photoshop, you can assign a profile for that image. So if you're going to upload it to Facebook or put it on your website, you want to assign the sRGB profile to it. But if you're saving it to your hard drive for use, or so for instance, if it's a master file for an image, then save it as your work, Adobe Rgb, would work well in most instances.
Right. Is there any software you could recommend as well, maybe for like color management workflow?
Well, the tools that DataColor makes, they all come with software mostly. We have the spider checker, which is the capture calibration tool, comes with software that will work with Adobe products, and it'll work with Hasselblad focus software as well. And what that will do is it'll create an auto correction for a file on a reference photo with the color chart in it. Our Spider Cube, which is like a 3-dimensional gray card, that doesn't come with software, but that will work with any raw converter where you can adjust, white balance and black tones and your exposure, that type of thing.
So it's like a virtual like gray card basically that kind of stays inside of your software.
Spider Cube is not. No, that's
okay.
That's also a location target. So a spider checker, which is the color chip chart, if you have the time to set it up, or if you're using, or when, like personally for me, most of my work, I'm not using a spider checker or a color chip chart, or even like the Spider Cube. And what these capture targets do is it gives you a reference to use in your editing. It's not about correcting at the point of capture. It's about giving you a reference to use in your editing.
Okay.
When you do sit down at a computer, you can make an edit effectively. Or you can set a custom white balance using a gray card, or the reverse side of a spider checker in camera to do an in-camera white balance. So it's, that would be the use case at capture.
Got it. Okay.
But so the Spider X, the display calibration tools, they will come with. They both have their own software, and the Spider Print, which is the custom printer profile software or tool, that will come with its own software as well. But you want to be, Lightroom and Photoshop, really those are the standards in the industry. But there are also very good. There are also other very good software. I mean, the one is a raw editor that I've used for a long time that I really enjoy using. Affinity Photo is a very good solid product too. And I'm just speaking for the ones that I'm familiar with. But those are all color managed, and those are all they offer all the tools that you would need to have to edit color and edit effectively, and the color management tools.
Mm-hmm. So I'm personally a Lightroom user, and I'm curious, do you think it's enough to get by with Lightroom, or do you think you suggest for like intense color work you go elsewhere and then take it in afterwards?
I mean, Lightroom's a great place to do your raw editing. So, and then if you need to work on so Lightroom and a raw editor it's non-destructive. So it's not taking the file and altering it. It's creating a sidecar, and it's kind of like got your main file, and you've got this secondary file that is used to alter the main file. So all the it's like a non-destructive workflow for editing for raw files.
Okay.
And when a raw outputs or exports that image, it then at that point it bakes in those corrections, and then then you're working on a pixel level, like in Photoshop or Affinity Photo, and that's when you're playing the file itself. But in a raw editor, you're creating this of adjustments that's applied to the image, but it's not destroying. I'm doing that in quotes. It's not destroying or altering the image. You can always reverse it and go back.
Yeah. Okay.
Where in Photoshop or Affinity Photo, you're kind of relying on going back in history to get to those edits. Whereas in Lightroom or Capture One, you can just erase that sidecar or that secondary.
Okay. So you can still press Control Z in Affinity and reset the last step. It's not like destructive like all the way. If that's
So
okay.
In a pixel for Photoshop, it's an Affinity Photo. It's Affinity Photo has different modules. So one is a raw editor, So you can raw edit within Affinity Photo, but in the pixel-based editor in Affinity Photo, you're relying on the history of what's happened to the file to erase what's gone on. Whereas a raw editor erase that secondary file that was created with your edits. You still have your original raw file is still fully intact.
Got it. Okay.
So can you take the same raw file and like basically allocate multiple ICC profiles and like color spaces to them?
Well, you could theoretically, yeah. But I think what I was talking about previously wasn't about, it was more about the theory of what is a raw processor, what is like Photoshop or Affinity Photo is. And I wasn't just relating management to those two. It was just editing in general and what goes on in those.
Got it. Okay.
Right.
In theory, if a raw file does not have an assigned profile, whatever is your working color space, the raw processor, whatever is assigned to, you could, in theory, create multiple instances of that file, and I guess 3 different color, different color settings to it. So yeah, I in theory it would work.
Yeah, but ICC kind of covers your whole set of colors, on your monitor more than the individual file. That's what I'm.
So the working color space of an application relates to how the application takes the color information of that file and renders it within the application.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working in Adobe RGB, that means your application is going to use RGB to transform the color information in your file so that you see it in the application. It's kind of like I don't want to call it a filter because it's not a filter. It's how information, your image file is processed to look on within the application.
Mm-hmm.
Like your output profile. So if you're going to apply a profile to it as you export, like a sRGB, basically it's saying that the file opened up next, it needs to be in such a way that relates to sRGB.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely important, I think, for photographers to kind of at least get involved with with some of these technical skills. So kind of going along with calibrating, you talked about printing a bit, but do you want to touch upon a bit more about kind of how calibration it's pretty much crucial for printing your photos?
Yeah, so it's kind of, think of it like this. If we're talking, if ICC color standards are a language, so if it's a language, and you're setting your monitor ICC standard of accurate and appropriate for digital communication. The profile that you use for the paper combination, that's also set to those standards. It allows you to have better frequency when you send your image that you've seen on your monitor. So what was always explained to me is, color management can help manage expectations. And I mean by that is you have your expectation is when you see your image on your computer is that's really how the image looks. When you hit print, you want to print an image, your expectation is that it's going to print as you see it on your monitor. Mm-hmm. Using profiles really helps make those expectations come to life. I've always seen, we're photographers, we're artists, we're to be able to focus on our art. Implementing some of these color management principles allow the technology that we use to make our art kind of, it makes it work together, but it kind of, the real problem becomes not how do I alter my image on the screen so it looks better in print. It becomes kind of getting the technology, is giving the technology a back seat, if you will. It allows you to really focus on the hard work of creating art, and let technology work for you.
I was gonna say I've done a fair amount of printing myself, but I mean, like for the first couple probably years, I didn't calibrate my monitor or do any sort of color management, honestly. I mean, besides like adjusting the white balance, but what would you recommend, I guess, to get started with, calibrating photos for print?
Well, the place to begin is display calibration. It's I think probably a discussion to have next is, if DataColor has 2 display calibrators, how do you identify which one is for you? They both have different of features and such. How do you determine, and to this point too, how do you determine which one is meant you can effectively use? I will say this at the beginning: use either SpiderX Pro or SpiderX Elite to be an effective printer. Both will give you what you need to print effectively. The first way I determine, when speaking with people about which is the right calibration tool is how many monitors they're using. If somebody is using 2 monitors, SpiderX Pro can, that's the entry point. The SpiderX Pro can calibrate multiple displays, but the SpiderX Elite can help make them more consistent.
More consistent with each other? Is that?
Each other, yeah.
Okay.
So, and one of the things that we often get asked is, I've kept both monitors, how come they don't look the same? Mm-hmm. Calibration is going to maximize the color performance of a display. And that's based on ability. So if we have one standard gamut or sRGB monitor next to a Adobe RGB monitor, they're both calibrated, you're often going to notice that the wider gamut, the Adobe monitor, appears to be saturated, probably a little warmer, and because best performance, the best performance of a standard gamut monitor is smaller. It's not as colorful and the same as an Adobe RGB monitor. And so the SpiderX Elite can do is it can visually tune your secondary monitor so it looks more like your primary monitor. There are ways to measure color in the world around us, and that's what the calibration tools will be doing for you. But all perceive color a little bit differently. So you can, 3 of us can sit down in front of a computer and we can say, monitor looks this way, the other monitor looks this way. But Henry, they may look exactly the same to you. So we do have a little bit of a perceptual difference in what we see. But so I guess I'm getting to land the plane here. The Elite does offer a way to fine tune your monitor so it looks more like your primary. Your primary is always going to be your main monitor to do your color critical work on. If you see a little bit of difference between the 2 monitors, it is okay, because your primary monitors are going to be your, the more capable monitors is what you're going to choose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, obviously, I guess if you're trying to match one monitor, you would lose some accuracy in the one you're matching to, or the one that's trying to match the other one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you don't want to, dumb down one monitor so it looks more like the, your secondary monitor. You want to, if you Adobe RGB monitor, that's your primary monitor. So.
Got it. Okay.
So how many displays that somebody's using is really that's when I would go with the SpiderX Elite. Somebody's doing video workflow. that the Elite also has the tools for video calibration standards.
So that's a whole nother ball game with video too. All these different
Yeah.
standards.
It is.
How much overlap is there with compared to like photography?
Different game. I mean, there's different color spaces that are used. We're very familiar with sRGB and Adobe RGB and P3. For video, it's Rec 709, Rec 2020. They're applying lookup and LUTs to files, and it's not my comfortable environment. I'll say that. I'm not gonna the person to talk to about video calibration and standards, but it's a different lingo, different standards. But there is a workflow for it. You can make a video workflow you can make it accurate. But
yeah, I've just started myself. The camera I got recently shoots log. It's the first time I've had something like that, and it's crazy with all the LUTs and everything. I kind of switched it back to just the normal profiles for now, because
I don't have the experience shooting video to really talk too much about it, but
so I do have a question about that though. Like, a lot of photographers nowadays, they shoot like maybe little clips of, say you're a wildlife photographer, you shoot a little clip of the subject you're shooting. Do you think it's okay to have a kind of photography calibrated setup and then still get fairly accurate colors for your video? I mean, do you think that's okay for more amateurs?
I mean, when you calibrate your display, it's not for photo or for video. It's calibration. It's accuracy in more absolute terms.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's good. All right. So it's more universal there. So what is that video specific calibrator actually doing? It's getting the color space, the different color spaces?
Allows you, it's not going to, let's say, limit the number of colors that you see on your screen, but it's going to affect how your video application is going to render color within there. Okay. So it's going to see. Yeah. So if you calibrate to Rec 709, that's going to impact how it is handled within the application that you're using. So within Premiere or
okay. Yeah,
about how it handled video files in the application.
I mean, I would assume that like Rec 709 is more compressed than, say, a raw color profile, a raw image color profile, just because you have to push more data through, over the minutes you're recording. So that definitely makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think just remember, raw doesn't have a color space assigned to it. That's assigned in the editor. Mm-hmm. But Rec 709 and Rec 2020 would, guy would probably scold me for saying this, but they more relate to, like, Rec 709 is more similar to sRGB. Rec 2020 is more similar to Adobe or a wider gamut like that. So, and I'm not saying it's a one-to-one, ship, but it's, Rec 709 is smaller than Rec 2020. That's a similar relationship in the video world to the photo world.
Got it. All right.
Any video people listening, I might have just.
Well, I mean, I really think it's starting to get, there's very few people nowadays who don't shoot at least some video. So it's definitely useful, and we appreciate you bringing it up as well.
Yeah, I've exposed myself here.
You're all good. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So how much has all this color management played into like your photography in particular?
It's certainly, I love it's made printing effectively know what I see on my screen is what I'm going to get in print. Obviously, a monitor is a backlit device. A print is you're dealing with reflected light. So you're going to say, if somebody says screen to print matching, either it's a theoretical concept. Your monitor will be calibrated to give you a very good reference for what on print, but a print will always be very different than a monitor. If that makes sense. I always say the print needs to stand alone. Your viewer is never going to see your monitor. Your monitor needs to be an effective for you, so that you get that effective print. So, for instance, here I always will brighten the and in my images before I send them to print, and it's not because monitor isn't calibrated a proper way. It's just, we'll call that editing for print. I know kind of the moves that I need to make to make it look better. But you have a calibrated monitor to give you a starting point, I guess is probably the way to put it, is to make those decisions. Making a print is often not as simple as just hitting print. I will say it's like knowing your camera, how your camera will react in certain situations, how it captures highlights, how to push that histogram, how much is on the screen, you can push it to before you really do lose information. You become accustomed, you get to know that camera, and your printer is the same way. You realize the relationship between screen and what you get on paper. It's in pixels, and putting it or pixels to paper is really what I like to call it. It's it's one of those things where it's a feel. You've got a visual reference, but you also have a feel for how that image is going to look in print, and that's with just simply making prints. Using profiles, having a calibrated monitor, you can building that feel because the technology is going to work in a certain way. Really, and again, it goes back to making putting the technology in the back seat and not the main thing to over. We all have a creative vision for the work that we create, and that should be the struggle and not the technology. And what color management can do is effectively get it away, give it the back seat. Mm-hmm. So your prime concern really becomes making the art that you want to make.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, as artists, we don't have a lot of time either, and I think DataColor, makes great tools that you could do it quickly, and consistently too. Every month or so. So.
Yeah. So if I were to say, that is definitely one way that color management has changed my workflow. With capturing the interiors accurately, I needed to slow down. It was not a simple run and gun, set up the tripod, throw a couple lights here and there, click, be done with it. It was really a matter of, putting a lot of thought into in front of my lens. And anytime you can slow down and consider the environment, consider what's within the frame of what in your viewfinder. Anytime you go down and really play what you're doing, that is a good thing.
Yeah. And going back to the printing thing, it's like the print is forever. Like once you make it, that's just how it looks in a sense. But like the monitor is always changing. You always need to be keeping it up to date and calibrating it too.
Man, there's so many great reasons to print. And that's one of them, is that the print is not going to change based on, the it will the monitor. Let's say that. I don't want to say that the print is never going to change, because the print does have a lifespan. If it's not taken care of very well, it changes based on lighting that it's in. But you will never. There's how many of us have been in this situation where we're saying, hey, I'm sorry that the image looks on my computer than it does on your phone or your iPad. A print really kind of solidifies a photographic and artistic thought. So, it really helps you leave a legacy, if you will. It completes the, your application. You stop and you photograph something, you put a lot of thought into it. When you take that image and make a print, and I'm talking about really contemplating the process and, thinking how you're editing it and really just kind of getting the most of that image that you can, and really getting it to the point where you're really articulating what you saw on scene. When you make a successful print, you're kind of close on a photographic and artistic thought, and that's something that digitally in many ways, but there's a finality that making really to kind of do, and that's, as an artist, I think more effectively that way. And I'm not saying about anybody who isn't printing, but I think there is a process that you go through as an artist of making a physical, tangible thing that's just that's just enjoyable. It's good for your artistic growth. I think you from a print a lot more than hard drive and visiting it someday. Mm-hmm. It really, for me, a print is the completion of an artistic and photographic thought, and when you can complete that thought, it allows you to move on to the next image, more of making that one better. I think you grow through printing, so it's enjoyable, but I think it's just very beneficial for your artistic.
Yeah, for
artistically,
sure.
I think it's a growth. It's a growth, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with more with that. Yeah, no better way to say it.
And this has been a great episode. I've really learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has too. It's been awesome. So thanks for coming on, John.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any places where maybe we could learn more about color management or DataColor, or perhaps even your work?
Well, so spiderx.datacolor.com is our display calibration. That really is the home of DataColor's. We'll call them consumer tools, but that's anything for color management for photographers and creatives. You can go to datacolor.com and get to that site the same way, but spiderx.datacolor.com. It's been a while updated, but I'll give you my website. It's johnwalrath.com. Okay. JOHNWALRATH.com. That's where you can see my work. And I have goals of updating soon, so you can see it there.
Awesome.
The Spider blog I do contribute there occasionally. And I think you just get through that from the SpiderX site.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. Well, we appreciate you coming on tonight. And yeah,
this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been
awesome.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure, John.
Thank you so much for watching the All Outdoors Photography Podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the video version on YouTube as well. You can subscribe down below, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.